Caroline Baker stood in the kitchen of her two-story home nestled in Collingswood, a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The morning sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns of light on the polished countertops. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and she wore a navy pantsuit. As the assistant director of finance at Harrison Global, a large accounting firm, Caroline was known for her meticulousness and strong sense of responsibility. Her accuracy and foresight were highly valued by her colleagues. This morning, she had risen early as usual, prepared breakfast for her family, and just finished making sandwiches for lunch. "Mom, Melissa, breakfast is ready," Caroline called out as she arranged warm scrambled eggs and toast on the dining table. Footsteps came down the stairs, followed by her mother, Doris. Since losing her husband John to a heart attack 12 years ago, Doris had been working part-time in an administrative position. With her silver gray hair cut short and not bothering to hide her tired expression, she reached for a coffee cup. "Thank you, Caroline," Doris said flatly. Her words carried more of an acknowledgement of routine than genuine gratitude. Caroline was used to this. After her father's death, she had naturally become the pillar supporting her family. Initially, she thought it would be temporary, but as time passed, it had become permanent. She covered most of the rent, groceries, utilities, and sometimes even personal expenses for Doris and Melissa. "Is Melissa still sleeping?" Caroline asked, glancing at the clock. It was already past 8. "Leave her be," Doris said, sipping her coffee. "She was out late last night." Caroline sighed quietly. Her sister Melissa worked at a local clothing shop, but most of her income went toward her own clothes, accessories, and dining out with friends. The Baker family finances essentially rested on Caroline's shoulders. Just then, Caroline's smartphone vibrated. The screen displayed an email from her boss. "Today's meeting changed to 9 a.m. Important client attending." "I need to hurry," Caroline said as she stood up and grabbed her bag. "Tell Melissa I left breakfast for her in the refrigerator. And I'll be home a bit early today." Without looking up from her newspaper, Doris asked, "Why? Is something going on?" Caroline hesitated momentarily. "Not really," she began, then stopped herself. Perhaps her family was planning a surprise. She didn't want to ruin it. "Work should finish early today." "I see," Doris responded indifferently. "By the way, the refrigerator's acting up. Could you take a look at it?" "I'll check it tonight," Caroline answered as she headed toward the front door. Before leaving the house, she noticed a small red circle on today's date on the kitchen calendar. April 15th. Her birthday. While driving, Caroline took a deep breath. The truth was, she had a secret she hadn't told anyone. She had received a job offer from a major company in Chicago. The salary was 1.5 times her current one, with a significant opportunity for career advancement. For the past year, she had thought about this offer repeatedly, wrestling with the decision. Considering her family, leaving Philadelphia seemed difficult. But lately, she had been thinking more about her own life. How long would she continue living for others and putting herself last? Upon arriving at the office, her colleague Jennifer was waiting with a smile. "Happy birthday." She handed Caroline a coffee cup. "It's a special cappuccino." Caroline returned a genuine smile. At least at work, her special day hadn't been forgotten. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the large office windows, gently illuminating Caroline's desk. She signed the last report and shut down her computer. Today, unusually, she had managed to finish all her work ahead of schedule. "Leaving already?" Jennifer looked up from the neighboring desk. "Yes, it's a special day," Caroline answered with a smile. Jennifer stood up, approached Caroline, and whispered, "Have you thought about the Chicago offer?" Caroline glanced around before nodding slightly. "I still can't decide. When I think about my family." You always think too much about others, Jennifer said with a serious expression. Isn't it time to prioritize yourself for once? Caroline didn't respond to her friend's words, merely shrugging. Deep down, she felt Jennifer was right. However, her sense of responsibility and obligation to her family, cultivated over many years, wasn't easy to shake off. Enjoy tonight, Jennifer patted her shoulder lightly. It's your special day. Thanks, Caroline replied with a smile. A small anticipation was growing in her heart. Last year on her birthday, Doris had bought a small cake from the supermarket. Melissa had given her an inexpensive card. It wasn't an extravagant celebration, but at least her family had remembered her birthday. At 5:30 p.m., Caroline parked her car in front of her home. The twilight gently embraced the residential area, and she could hear children playing in the neighboring yard. She took a deep breath and headed for the entrance. When she opened the door, she heard the television from the living room. I'm home, Caroline called out cheerfully. Doris, sitting on the sofa, answered without taking her eyes off the TV. Oh, you're early. Yes, I wanted to come home early today, Caroline replied expectantly. She entered the living room and stood beside her mother. Doris was engrossed in her favorite quiz show and didn't look at her daughter. Where's Melissa? Caroline asked, looking around. She went shopping with friends. Said she'd be back in the evening. Doris finally looked up at Caroline. Do you need something? Caroline hesitated slightly before answering, no, just checking. She waited for mention of her birthday, but Doris had already turned her attention back to the television. Mom, Caroline asked nervously, don't you think today is a special day? Doris tilted her head, thinking. Not particularly. Why, is something going on? A small pain shot through Caroline's heart. Her mother had forgotten her birthday. No, nothing, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. As she headed to the kitchen, Caroline tried to suppress her emotions. It's not a big deal, she told herself. Everyone's busy. However, she felt something heavy sinking deep in her chest. Never before had her birthday gone completely uncelebrated. Even if modest, her family had always acknowledged her special day in some form. Just as she opened the refrigerator to start preparing dinner, she heard the front door open. Melissa's cheerful voice echoed in the living room. Mom, look. I found this super cute dress on sale. Caroline peeked out from the kitchen and saw Melissa hurrying toward the sofa, both arms laden with shopping bags. Caroline, you're home early, Melissa said when she noticed her sister. Perfect timing. What's for dinner? I'm starving. Caroline paused and turned around. Today, am I cooking? Her voice held a slight mixture of hope and question. Of course, who else? Melissa answered matter-of-factly. Mom has her bridge club, and I'm going to see a movie with Jessica. The show starts at 8, so I'd like to eat early. Caroline was speechless. Not only had everyone forgotten her birthday, but they expected her to prepare dinner as usual. But today is. Caroline began, then stopped. What? Melissa said with slight irritation. Nothing, Caroline answered quietly. She slowly returned to the kitchen and stood motionless in front of the refrigerator. Inside were neatly arranged fresh vegetables and meat, all stocked by her over the weekend. She placed her hand on the refrigerator door and sank into thought. Throughout her life, Caroline had sacrificed much for her family. After her father's death, she had just graduated from college but immediately started working to support the household. Melissa was able to attend university because of Caroline's support. Medical expenses for Doris, home renovations, everything had been covered by her. Despite all that, her birthday had been forgotten. Suddenly, a strong resolve sprouted in Caroline's heart. She stopped her hand that was about to put on an apron and quietly picked up her bag. Returning to the living room, she found Melissa and Doris each absorbed in their own activities. Melissa was trying on her new clothes, and Doris was preparing for her bridge club. "I'm going out for a while," Caroline announced quietly. "What? What about dinner?" Doris asked in surprise. "You'll have to manage on your own today," Caroline said without turning back, heading for the door. Her voice was calm, but it carried a strength that neither had heard before. "What's that about? How selfish." Melissa's angry voice reached her back. "What are we supposed to do?" Caroline stopped and slowly turned around. In her eyes floated emotions she had suppressed for years. "I've lived for you all this time. Surely I can take some time for myself today." Doris and Melissa were left speechless, staring at Caroline. Their faces showed confusion and surprise. "What do you mean?" Melissa asked discontentedly. Caroline didn't answer. She simply opened the door quietly and took a deep breath of the outside air. The twilight sky was beautifully tinged with orange. She steeled her resolve and closed the door. Getting into her car, she took a deep breath. "It's time to go somewhere where I can find my own worth." Caroline started the engine and left the house behind. As dawn broke, the view of Philadelphia spread out from the window of a downtown business hotel. Caroline sat on the bed and picked up her smartphone. The call history showed more than a dozen missed calls from Melissa and Doris since last night. Several text messages had also arrived. Caroline sighed and replied briefly to the messages, "I won't be back for a while." "Don't worry." She took a sip of coffee and gazed out the window. Last night, as soon as she arrived at the hotel, she had emailed the HR representative of the Chicago company, "Is it still possible for me to accept your offer?" By the time she finished breakfast, a reply from the HR representative had arrived, "Of course it is possible. Let's meet." Caroline's mind was made up. Looking at the clock, she saw it was 10 a.m. At Harrison Global, they would be wondering about her absence. She made a call, explaining that she would be taking a few days off due to health issues. Her boss asked with concern, "Is something wrong?" But she simply replied, "I just need some time." Meanwhile, at Caroline's house, Doris and Melissa greeted the morning in a state of mingled confusion and anger. "Still no word?" Doris asked Melissa as she stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee that Caroline had stocked up on yesterday. "Just a short message," Melissa showed her smartphone. "I won't be back for a while." "Don't worry," she says. "What is this, some kind of novel?" "I wonder what happened," Doris said anxiously. "Did I say something strange yesterday?" Melissa shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe it's just Caroline being moody. Even Ms. Perfect gets stressed sometimes. But without her." Doris cut off her words and looked around the kitchen. "What about dinner? Why not order pizza?" Melissa answered simply. "She'll be back tomorrow, I'm sure. Caroline has hardly ever been away from home." Doris nodded anxiously. "I suppose." They still hadn't realized how significantly Caroline's absence would impact their lives. On the morning of the second day, Caroline was at her hotel, laptop open, preparing for her interview in Chicago. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Jennifer. "What's going on? Are you okay? Your boss was worried." Caroline quietly explained the situation, about her family, her birthday, and her decision to accept the Chicago offer. "You finally made a decision for yourself," Jennifer's voice carried a sense of relief. "Actually, I've been waiting for the day you'd be free from your family's burden." "I wouldn't call it a burden." Caroline tried to defend. "Don't say that," Jennifer's voice was gentle yet firm. "You've been supporting them all this time, both financially and emotionally. But they've taken your presence for granted. This isn't a healthy relationship." Caroline fell silent at her friend's words. Jennifer continued, Melissa is 28, right? That's old enough to be independent. And your mother needs to rebuild her own life instead of depending entirely on you. But can they manage without me? They will, Jennifer asserted. People can change when necessary. They didn't need to change because you were always there. After the call ended, Caroline gazed out the hotel window at the spring sunlight illuminating the spaces between buildings. Her heart was a mixture of determination and anxiety. Meanwhile, Doris and Melissa faced an unexpected problem. Checking the mailbox, Doris found an envelope marked urgent in red letters. Opening it, she discovered it was a warning for late mortgage payments. That's strange, Doris said, looking confused. Caroline always pays this. Maybe she forgot. Melissa responded indifferently. But she's never forgotten before. Doris stared at the envelope intently. Actually, I wonder if she's been paying all along. Melissa turned to her mother. What do you mean? Every month, I gave her my share for household expenses, but... Doris trailed off. I never knew exactly how much everything really cost. Melissa rose from the sofa and paced around the living room. But the house is in your name, right? So isn't it your responsibility? Silently, Doris headed to Caroline's room. She opened the door without knocking and entered. In the orderly room, she approached Caroline's desk. The top drawer was locked, but the bottom one opened. Inside were neatly organized files of bills and payment records. Doris began checking them one by one: mortgage, electricity, gas, water, internet, loans for both cars, insurance. There was evidence that Caroline had been paying for everything. This is... Doris was at a loss for words. It became clear that the share she had been giving Caroline each month didn't even cover half of the actual living expenses. While she was examining the documents, Melissa entered the room. What are you looking at? Caroline has been paying for everything. Doris showed the documents with trembling hands. If she leaves, we might not even be able to continue living in this house. Melissa wore an expression of disbelief. Don't be ridiculous. That's surely an exaggeration. We work too, you know. Your income and mine combined wouldn't cover these payments. Doris's voice was desperate. We may have relied on Caroline too much. That afternoon, another shock hit them. Melissa's credit card stopped working while she was shopping. It said I'd exceeded the limit. Melissa returned home bearing anger and anxiety. But that can't be right. It was just reset last week. Doris silently stared at the kitchen calendar. Melissa, she said slowly, have you noticed anything? What do you mean? Melissa responded irritably. This calendar, Doris pointed to April 15th, which had a red circle marked on it. Is it some kind of anniversary? Melissa took out her smartphone and opened her calendar app. A few seconds later, the color drained from her face. Mom. April 15th was Caroline's birthday. They both fell silent. Only the sound of the living room clock broke the silence. What have we done? Doris finally spoke. Caroline supported everything, and we even forgot her birthday. Melissa began to reflect on their behavior for the first time, taking Caroline's contributions for granted and always pushing their demands on her. No wonder Sis is angry, she said in a small voice. At that moment, the doorbell rang. The two exchanged glances and nervously approached the door. When they opened it, a woman from the bank was standing there. Are you Caroline Baker's family? She asked in an official tone. I'm Linda White, a loan officer from First National Bank. I'm here to discuss something important. Linda calmly explained the situation. 3 months ago, Caroline had applied for a modification of the mortgage terms, but the signature of the title holder, Doris, was also needed. However, since they couldn't reach Caroline, the process had stalled. Without the signature, unfortunately, We'll have to begin foreclosure procedures next week, she said matter-of-factly. Doris and Melissa were speechless. The reality unfolding before them was harsher than they had imagined. For the first time, they fully understood how dependent they had been on Caroline. And simultaneously, they realized how fragile their lives were now that she was gone. "We need to contact Caroline," Doris said with a trembling voice. Melissa picked up her smartphone and sent a message to her sister, "Sis, please. Come back. We can't manage without you." But there was no reply. A week had passed since Caroline left home. In a conference room overlooking Chicago's skyscrapers, she signed a contract. As she put down her pen, Michael Finch, the HR director sitting across from her, stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to Bradford Investments, Caroline," Michael said with a warm smile. "Your experience and capabilities will be a great asset to our finance department." "Thank you," Caroline replied with dignity. "I appreciate the opportunity." Leaving the conference room, she stood by the window, looking down at the sprawling Chicago cityscape. Her salary was 1.5 times her current one, her position upgraded from assistant director to director. Above all, there was the satisfaction of having her abilities properly valued. However, thoughts of her family still lingered in her heart. Taking out her smartphone, she saw more than 10 unread messages from Melissa. The first few were full of anger and blame, but the recent ones had changed to a pleading tone. "Sis, please. Contact us. We're really struggling without you." Caroline took a deep breath and closed the messages. Jennifer's words came to mind, "You need to value yourself. It's not selfish, it's healthy self-preservation." Her appointment with a Chicago real estate agent was approaching. Caroline left the company to search for a new apartment. Meanwhile, at the Baker home in suburban Philadelphia, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Electricity was partially restricted, hot water was barely available, and the refrigerator was nearly empty. "What should we do?" Melissa sat at the kitchen table, holding her head. In front of her were piled unpaid bills. "My salary alone can't cover these." Doris silently gazed out the window. "Neither can mine," she finally said. "With just a part-time salary." The two fell silent. In the week without Caroline, their lives were on the brink of complete collapse. "I contacted Caroline's colleague," Melissa said. "They only said she took vacation." But one woman asked, "Haven't you heard about her job change?" Doris turned with a surprised expression. "Job change?" Melissa took out her smartphone and opened a screen. "I looked into it." Checking Caroline's LinkedIn. She showed the screen to Doris. The profile had been updated, Bradford Investments, Finance Director, Chicago. Chicago? Doris's voice was trembling. "She really intends to leave us. But why?" Melissa was confused. "Just because we forgot her birthday." "It's not just a birthday," Doris said quietly. "That was merely the trigger." She went to Caroline's room and began examining the documents again. From the back drawer, she found a small locked diary. There was no key, but considering the circumstances, Doris decided to open it. On the last page was written, "Enough is enough. My 34th birthday is a milestone. Time to make a decision to live for myself." Turning to earlier pages, there were words, "Should I accept the offer from Chicago? What about my family?" The date was from a year ago. She'd been considering it for a year. Doris said in a small voice. Melissa leaned against the doorframe, watching her mother. "But why didn't she say anything? We're family, aren't we?" She couldn't. Doris closed the diary. "Have we ever listened to her? Have we ever respected her wishes or dreams?" The two sank into silence. For the first time, they were beginning to see things from Caroline's perspective. As a last resort, Doris stood up. "Let's call Jennifer," Caroline's best friend. Melissa nodded and searched for Jennifer's contact on her smartphone. While the dial tone rang, the two waited with tense expressions. Jennifer's voice came through. "Jennifer, this is Doris Baker, Caroline's mother." "Mrs. Baker," Jennifer's voice was cold. "What can I do for you?" "I desperately need to contact Caroline. I know she's moved to Chicago." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Let me be honest," Jennifer said in a stern tone. "Caroline has put her own life second to yours for years. She could have accepted the Chicago offer a year ago, but she declined, thinking of you. But when she discovered that you couldn't even remember her birthday, she reassessed her own worth." Doris had no words to return. "She's not coming back," Jennifer continued. "And you have no right to make her. Caroline has the right to live her own life." "I understand," Doris answered in a small voice. "I just want to apologize to her." On the other end of the phone, Jennifer sighed. "I'll pass on the message. But don't expect anything." When the call ended, a heavy silence filled the living room. "What do we do now?" Melissa asked anxiously. "We do what we can," Doris answered with a determined expression. "First, I'll look for a full-time job. And you should apply for a better-paying position too." "Yes." Melissa pondered. "But what about the house loan? The foreclosure?" "That might be unavoidable," Doris said in a realistic tone. "We might need to move to a small apartment. We won't be able to afford luxuries." Melissa nodded silently. In her eyes, there was a determination she had never shown before. Doris headed to the kitchen and took out a video camera. "As a last hope, let's send Caroline a message of sincere apology and gratitude." She set up the camera and sat down beside Melissa. Before pressing the record button, she took a deep breath. "Caroline, we don't know if you'll ever see this, but..." Doris began, fighting back tears. "We took your value for granted. We've realized that without you, neither this house nor our lives can function. But more than that, losing you as a person is what hurts the most. Please forgive us." Melissa continued, also in tears, "Sis, we're trying to change. We're not as strong as you, but we want to stand on our own feet. Please, be happy." After sending the video, for the first time, the two took a genuine step toward independence. Caroline's reply came 3 days later. The brief email contained an address in Chicago and simply said, "If you want to talk, come next Saturday." When Doris and Melissa arrived at Caroline's apartment, it was in a luxury high-rise. With nervous expressions, they rode the elevator and pressed the intercom for the 15th floor. Caroline, who opened the door, looked tired but more confident than before. She was wearing a black pantsuit, and her hairstyle was new. "Come in," she said briefly. The living room overlooked Lake Michigan. Caroline prepared coffee, and the three sat at the dining table. "I saw your video," Caroline began quietly. "Caroline." Doris started, searching for words. "We're truly sorry. It's true that we took your value for granted. And we didn't respect your life or dreams, always pushing our own convenience." Melissa nodded. "Sis, we're changing. I've started working at a new accounting firm. And Mom has started working full-time." Caroline quietly listened to their words. "I don't resent you," she finally spoke. "But I too have the right to live my life. I've devoted myself to the family all this time, but now I want to live for myself as well." "We understand," Doris nodded slightly. "What about the house?" she asked fearfully. Caroline took a deep breath before answering. "I'm starting a new life in Chicago. But I'll pay the mortgage for 3 more months. During that time, you two decide what to do next." These were harsh terms, but the two had no right to complain. On the train ride back, Doris and Melissa quietly discussed their options. "We need to find a small apartment," Doris said. Melissa nodded. "We'll manage." 6 months later, Doris and Melissa had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment. Doris was working as a full-time receptionist, and Melissa was seriously continuing her job at an accounting firm. The two were maintaining a modest but self-sufficient lifestyle. Caroline was finding success in Chicago, surrounded by new friends. She had begun talking with her family on the phone once a month, sharing updates with each other. The relationship was gradually being repaired. On her birthday the following year, she received heartfelt cards and small gifts from Doris and Melissa. "We think of you every day. Only after you left did we understand your value. We're living on our own strength now, but we'll never forget our gratitude to you." Caroline smiled as she read the card. Her decision had been tough, but ultimately it had brought growth for everyone. Doris and Melissa had moved from dependence to independence, and Caroline from sacrifice to self-fulfillment. She gazed at the twilight from her Chicago window and took a deep breath. Sometimes, leaving can be the most loving act. And true bonds are nurtured beyond distance, Caroline thought with a quiet smile.